Joe Biden gets inaugurated on January 20th. Donald Trump is facing another impeachment by the Democrats. And social media app Parler gets banned by Apple and Google. The country is more divided than ever. Let's get to the root of the problem and figure out why this is happening and why violence in the US will continue. Now, I just wanted to say real quick, guys, this isn't going to be a normal video for me. Usually we like to focus a lot more on comedy, but I feel like this is something that really needs to be talked about, and there are some things that really need to be said. So without further ado, guys, I stream on Facebook Gaming. Link will be in the description below if you want to check me out, but let's get into the video. Now, first, let's talk about why our country is so divided at the moment. And honestly, it's not only our country, it's happening all across the world. But I recently watched a movie on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, right? It's about like an hour, maybe an hour and a half long documentary talking about, why everything is so divided. And a lot of it talks about stuff that most of us kind of already know about social media and how it controls us. But it presents it in a way that is very eye-opening, right? Now, basically, the premise of the whole documentary, which I agree with, and most people that watch it do agree with, is that social media companies like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc., have an algorithm in place that is designed to keep you on the platform by showing you content that you are most likely to react to. Now, think about that for a second. What type of content are you going to react most strongly to when scrolling on social media? Negative content, divisive content. Therefore, that's what these platforms are constantly showing people, right? The most divisive content, because that's what's getting the reactions from people. Now, in this documentary, they interviewed the people that originally made these algorithms. These people regret what they did. Their intentions were good in the beginning, right? They weren't making these algorithms to divide the country or to get people more pissed off. These algorithms were meant to just keep you on the platforms longer, but they have these negative effects of constantly showing you stuff that affirm your opinions rather than contesting them, and things that will piss you off. Now that we understand that, let's get into how Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter try to fix the problem here. You see, they don't really try to fix the problem. They kind of just try to put band-aids on it, because at the end of the day, these algorithms are making them a lot of money, right? Because the longer you spend on their platforms, the more money they make from ad revenue. The more they know about you, and the more they know of what makes you tick, the more they fucking make out of you, right? So they don't want to adjust these algorithms. So instead, what they do is they put band-aids on the problem by censoring and muting people and content that they deem themselves, not the people, not the users of the platforms, content that they themselves deem to be divisive. But as we're seeing now, this is only causing even more division. You can't just put a band-aid on the problem. You have to go to the root of the cause. So instead of Facebook, for example, adjusting the algorithm so that these negative effects don't come to fruition, they just try to censor things that they think is negative and divisive. I hope that's making sense, right? So Facebook's been doing this for a while, right? For example, Facebook and Twitter mostly, right? You're not seeing this as much on YouTube, but you do see it a little bit. You see a lot of mostly conservative YouTube channels. They're constantly complaining about being demonetized and stuff like that. But let's talk about Facebook and Twitter, right? Whenever Facebook mutes or bans somebody, people get very angry, right? And especially if it's based off of a political opinion or topic, people get especially angry because, you see, if you're not from the US, you need to understand something about the US. The First Amendment in the US is freedom of speech, right? It is our most basic right that we have. It is what we believe as the thing that made our country great, right? Without freedom of speech in the US, we don't have anything, right? It is the basis of what makes our country great, in our opinion, right? Now, we have other rights listed in the Bill of Rights that give us our freedoms, but without freedom of speech, we can't really have the rest of them. Now, in other countries, you can literally go to jail or go to prison, get arrested for talking bad about politicians in your government. In the US, you can basically say whatever you want. You can voice any opinion you want as long as it's not directly threatening someone. That's whenever freedom of speech kind of all goes out the window. Once you start threatening somebody, especially like the president of the United States or something, they're coming after you, right? That's not considered freedom of speech here in the US. But basically anything else you can say. Americans hold on to this belief very strongly that this should not be compromised, right? So when you have social media companies like Twitter and Facebook censoring people for political opinions of all things, people take that as an attack on their freedom of speech. Now there's the argument that like, oh look, Twitter, Facebook, these are all private companies. They can do with what they want, which is true. I completely agree with that. I believe in capitalism. I think capitalism is the best economy. Whether you think so or not, I'm not here to argue about that. But look, I am under the belief that yes, all private companies, for the most part, should have freedom to operate their business as they see fit. But the problem here is, and I think most people that advocate for capitalism will also tell you that yes, although capitalism is the best economic system, it's the system that made America what it is not perfect, and no system is perfect. No system is perfect. Let me make myself clear on that. No system is perfect, but capitalism is widely believed to be the best. Now, with that being said, since capitalism is not perfect, some regulation is necessary. Now, the thing that most Americans may disagree on is how much regulation is necessary, right? You might have conservatives believing that less regulation is necessary, and you might have some Democrats believing that more regulation is necessary. The main arguments when it comes to capitalism in America is exactly how much regulation is okay and necessary. Now, here's the argument here. You have the people arguing that, hey, look, Twitter, Facebook, they have the right to ban Donald Trump from their platforms, right? They think he's inciting violence, even though Donald Trump did not directly incite violence, right? He encouraged his supporters to go and protest at the Capitol. He did not say go and break into the place and vandalize everything, blah, 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 shoot 4 people, whatever, right? But Twitter and Facebook have the right and the power to ban him if they want to. But I am under the belief that there should be an extent to where they can just censor everybody, right? Because especially with what's going on with Parler, right? So everybody's on Facebook or Twitter, right? People are using these platforms. There should be some moral responsibility on the owners of these platforms to understand both points of view and not just censor people willy-nilly, right? I believe there should be some, not much, but some type of regulation there to say that, look, you can't just arbitrarily go and pick and choose what type of speech can be censored, right? You can't, for example, say, oh, this type of speech is okay when it's in favor of one side of the political spectrum, but when it's in favor of the other side, we're gonna censor this or not censor this, right? Vice versa. Especially now, because big tech companies like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter own so much of the market share that when another company, social media company, tries to come in and say, like Parler, and say, hey, well, look, we're for freedom of speech. You can come on our platform. You can say whatever you want, right? You can go and say pretty much whatever you want. We're all for freedom of speech here. That's our appeal. And then when that app starts to get popular, you have companies like Apple and Google, which run, the iOS software on iPhones and the Android software on Android phones, which is like over 90% of the phone market share, saying, oh, wait, you can't have that type of app on our platforms. An app that is all for free speech, right? You got these companies banning platforms that are in favor of freedom of speech in a country like the United States of America, where our right to freedom of speech is the basis of our thriving nation. And this is the problem. This is the band-aid that big tech is trying to place on their faulty algorithm that works too well at keeping people on their platform and inadvertently causes division in this country in order for them to just make more money. Are you getting it yet? Now let's go back and let's talk about the violence that happened the other day at the US Capitol. Now, when you have all these things happening, right, the division in this country caused by social media platforms, which most people would agree is happening, and you have a large number of Americans in this country truly believing that their election was subject to fraud, any amount of fraud, right? Not necessarily an amount of fraud that was able to change the election, but any amount of fraud, right? This is supposed to be the most fair, most opportunistic and free country in the world, right? And you have half of the country truly believing that this fraud is happening. Now, look, I'm not going to go into my personal belief on whether I think on if fraud is happening or rather how much fraud is happening. I don't know. I have no idea. And honestly, I believe nobody really knows except for the people in the government, right? How much fraud truly happened in this last election. But we do know for a fact that some, maybe a minuscule amount, maybe just a minuscule amount of fraud, but some fraud did happen. And this is not okay, right? You can look this up. You can see how votes were changed in the voting machines and all this other stuff that just seems so sketchy, right? Although I don't condone it, but you almost can't blame them for doing what they did. Because if in fact it is true that fraud is happening on the American election, then we are no longer free. And what other choice do we have? Honestly, think about that. What if fraud is happening in our elections? What other choice do we have? And there lies the problem with why violence is happening in America and why it will continue to happen, is because you have half the country intentionally believing that our election was frauded and that there was some type of, maybe, I don't know, New World Order organization within our government that is controlling everything. So how do we move forward on this? Well, one way we could probably, start to ease the division in the country is if these social media companies would go and they would adjust these algorithms, right? But they can't, because the goal of these private companies is to maximize shareholders' profits. They can't do that by adjusting this algorithm, because this algorithm is perfect at keeping us addicted to these platforms. But it's what needs to happen. It's what has to happen, because if it doesn't, if they don't change, if they don't fix it at the root of the problem, the cause of all the division, then we can never recover from this. And I would love to go on a tangent about how if Democrats, conservatives, and everybody else from every party in the United States, political party, I would love it for everyone to just be able to come together despite all of our differences and come together and be one against the government, right? So that the government can no longer control us, because there is a belief that the government is controlling us. And I do believe to an extent that the US government is controlling us a little bit too much. And most of Americans will agree to this, right? Whether you're on the left and you believe that, there's systematic oppression within police forces, keeping black people down, or if you're on the right thinking our elections are fraud and that our votes don't matter, right? We're all in agreement that our government is starting to be a little bit too powerful for our liking. And it's easy to say, well, we just need to all come together. If we would all just come together and unite despite our differences, then everything would be okay. But it's not as easy as that, right? Because our differences are just too far opposite of each other. We cannot come together where half of Americans have completely opposing values of each other. It cannot happen, right? We are too far opposite between one side and the other, at least from the extremist point of view. If we were to come together, there would be no way for us to agree on exactly what are we fighting for and against. Therefore, this is my argument to why things are only going to get worse if the social media companies don't fix this algorithm, which I don't believe they're going to do anytime soon. I do have hope that in the long run, within the next hopefully 10, 15, 20 years, that if we make it that far, things will settle off over time and people will learn to live with each other. I feel like eventually that has to happen, but we have to make it to that point. And that point is not anywhere near us, right? It's very, very far away, and it's going to take a long time, and a lot more violence is going to happen. A lot more blood is going to be shed, and a lot more division will happen in America. Guys, thank you so much for listening to my TED Talk. If you want to come check out more of me, man, I stream on Facebook Gaming. Like I said, we mostly focus on comedy. We have a lot of fun there, man. Drop me a follow. Link will be in the description below. It'll be the most entertaining 2+ hours you could get without a hooker. Let's try our best to love each other and have a great day, fellas.